Okay, well, thank you all for coming and for staying with us and for delaying your post-conference drink another bit of time. I should maybe add that I find that thinking about climate policy does make one thirstier. So I warn you beforehand. Okay, I'm going to start by talking a bit about the challenges of doing climate policy. And it consists of three real-world challenges. One is its urgency. The second is that it requires global action. And now also, because we've delayed, it also requires continuous action. We really don't have time to go backwards for 5 years or 4 years or 10 years. In any large country. Maybe a little country could get away with it, and we would get to where we need to get to. It's urgent very much because not so much the denial and delay we engaged in, as because it will take no less than 30 years and possibly 50 years to achieve the low-carbon economy we need. I don't even think we can get to a no-carbon economy, but we can get to a low-carbon economy, but it can't really be done in much less time than that. So that being the case, policy scholarship too must act with urgency. We have to come up with usable policy ideas, saleable policy ideas, and we have to do it quite quickly. So I'm kind of encouraging you, despite the fear of alcoholism, to get into this field and use your expertise within it. You could say that there's no longer time on this policy front for Max Weber's slow grinding of hard boards, as he described science and social science in particular. We need to grind faster, I guess one might say. So let me just say, why is 30 years the minimum? A couple things are obvious. One is that the political resistance is strong to effective climate action from obvious sources. And the second is that the change required is thoroughly comprehensive. It affects everything we do, all our habits, all our devices, all our cities. Everything about it must be adjusted in some way or other. And there are three other things that suggest it's going to take a long time that are less obvious. One is that if you look historically, the earlier shifts from wood to coal and coal to oil and gas took 50 years each. And this switch is bigger because we're not just burning one thing instead of burning another thing, and the new thing is more efficient than the previous one. Coal more than wood, oil more than coal. We're not going to be burning anything much. And that's a very big adjustment to make. We're going to be electrifying almost everything. So, two other things. The things we must replace are all expensive, durable, and embody energy in their own production. Furnaces, vehicles, factories, power plants. If you just bought a new internal combustion engine car, you're not going to throw it away. It's going to take 10 to 15 years before it's used up the energy you've already embedded in it. So that's why the time, and power plants take longer to use up the amount of money and energy that was put into making them. So scrapping some things too early may cost as much fossil energy as it saves, because making them right now requires using it. The last thing on the list is there are some things at present we do not even know how to do without fossil fuels. Flying airplanes is one of them. There are a few little planes that can carry 1 or 2 people that are electric, but they don't go far and they can't bring any luggage. So mass flying of large numbers of people across oceans is not doable without fossil fuels at this point, and I haven't seen anyone suggest anything that's all that likely to work. Okay. The second challenge I can handle much more briefly, and that is that we need global action. I think that's apparent. But how often, we might ask, have virtually all nations ever acted in concert continuously over a long period of time? I stretched my brain going back to my international relations degree as an undergraduate student, and I couldn't come up with anything. There is a Paris Agreement, and that was a global agreement. We've hung on to all of the countries in it, but for one minor one to our south, which is becoming great again. But how many countries are living up to it? One, I'm supposed to insert some Canadian content here. I would suggest that Canada is one of those that has not lived up to what it agreed to. Though 8 or 9 out of the 10 provinces have. But the one province that hasn't, most decisively, tips the whole country out of compliance. It's one that's making, pumping, processing lots and lots of oil and using a whole lot of energy to do it because it's thick and it has to be heated before it can be separated from the sand. And they heat it with natural gas. Anyway, so Canada's not in compliance, not for not trying in a lot of places and succeeding in many. Okay, the last of the challenges that it must be continuous, and I think in many ways that's the toughest one, and I think it's the one that leads us to where the policy strategy needs to go. The power, and one of the reasons it must be continuous is that the power and desperation of what might be called legacy industries, fossil fuel industries, they're still with us for sure, but they may not be for more than another half a century at the outside, though there still would be petrochemicals, presumably, but that's less than 10%. And the financial institutions with overextended fossil fuel lending. I think that has a lot to do with Canada's non-compliance. Okay, the other is the so-called, euphemistically called populism. This links us back to the first plenary, and I think there is a real connection. There's recently been a reversal of climate actions in a number of countries and jurisdictions, and they include the United States, Brazil, Ontario, and Alberta. And there is a connection between populism. 2 of those 4 were driven by populism. Ontario's close to being driven by populism, a little less racially inclined in it, or anti-immigrant, as some of the others might be. But recent Canadian events do show how bad it can get. I'll just give you a couple of examples for local color of what the new Conservative government, now 1 year old, thank God, there's only 3 to go, has done about climate. It rejected the carbon tax that the federal government is pushing. It not only rejected it, but it uses taxpayer money to fund television advertising, denying the need for a carbon tax, which is awesome when you think about it. I'm going to ask for a refund of my tax dollars. And it also even applies advertisements at the pump at gas stations suggesting, oh my God, you know how much tax you're paying. I have I was going to say I have a bumper sticker on my electric car saying, "Carbon tax me." But I'm kind of afraid somebody's going to take out my windshield in retaliation. Anyway, I didn't drive to get here, so you can't get the car. Anyway, those are some of the, a couple other things they've done is remove electric car chargers at some train stations. They've spent money to get rid of something the previous government did. It sounds very much like Donald Trump. They go to a lot of trouble to undo whatever was done. Okay. The last bit of why continuous is a challenge, I think, is in many ways a bigger one, but it's down the road 10 or 20 years when we're actually being effective and demand for oil is falling fairly dramatically. Let's imagine in the best of all possible worlds, it's 30, 40% less than it is now. What's going to happen? I think what will happen is that the price of oil will fall. Some countries can produce oil for almost nothing. It's just a little bit of sand to scrape away, and there it comes. So what the temptation will be very great during recessions to haul that old gas car out of the barn and fill it up. And other, in poor nations particularly, when considering development planning, to say, oh my goodness, it's cheaper with oil than it is with all these windmills we've been paying for. It could happen. I mean, I think that's something that has to be kept in mind, and it really challenges the globalness of the action. I mean, wealthy countries can afford to do it. Other ones might not be able to afford to do it and be competitive. So anyway, to end that section of the talk, all of these political challenges must guide policy strategies and designs. And I've come to a few conclusions about this from having done a long review that has only found publication in short things. I'm working on a book, but the first one was done. I finished it just before Trump came to power, and it was somebody told me the first optimistic book I'd ever written. And then Trump came along, and I thought, well, this is kind of off the mark. So I'm revising. Anyway, from that look at who's done what about getting down to a low-carbon economy, what has been successful and what hasn't in all kinds of countries, I found that national governments are needed to do certain crucial things: carbon pricing, post-carbon infrastructure, things like high-speed rail, the national electricity grid revision. Those things really only at least national governments have to have a significant role within. They also need to do things about funding adaptation. It's just so capital intensive to move cities from one place to another or to build a wall around them if they're going under. And research funding needs to be at least in part national. But sort of aside from all those things national governments do need to do, many of the carbon actions that have been successful have been advanced by consumers, small entrepreneurs, large corporations, institutions, public mostly, civil society, and local government. So the policies should focus on empowering these multi-level public and private efforts. Government policies, I think that's important. The policy must anticipate that, otherwise national inertia can be lost during the periods where denialist regimes are in power. We have to face it, there will be denialist regimes, in many countries on and off over a 30 to 50 year period. It's almost unavoidable, especially in countries that have a large oil industry, an influential one. Anyway, the wonderful thing about all of these diverse activities in other entities within society is that as they grow, they build a resistance constituency. They are vested in, if you're a small solar entrepreneur installing solar panels on rooftops, you're not likely to vote for somebody who's going to put a tariff on imported solar panels. It's just not going to happen. And the person who put the solar panels on my rooftop was pretty clear about that. He said, you know, people who get into that kind of business are smart. He's a, you know, trained engineer and construction person. He can do these things. Okay, I'm going to give a few examples. I think I'm about half my time. A few examples of the non-governmental and local government initiatives, just to give you a feel for the range of things that actually exist out there. The first is just a statistical thing. In the United States, the number of farms is declining fairly rapidly and has been for a very long time. That is, there are just as many acres planted, but the farms are bigger and bigger. The small farms tend to go under. But in a recent five-year period, the number of organic farms in the face of this decline increased by 27%. The value of organic sales in the same period was up 84%. So organic, which needs fossil fuels, avoids the need for fossil fuels, has grown. Similarly, local food has grown, small farmers supplying local markets. The number of farmers markets in the United States was 74% increased in a similar five-year recent period. So, many new small growers have gained access to land. And a lot of this is driven by consumer choice. People are choosing, many are doing it for climate change reasons. Others are doing it for all kinds of other reasons. But the point is, the trend is there in the market. Also, some of these new producers are extremely innovative. I've been to a few of them, not to the one I'm going to mention, but they can grow year-round vegetables in unheated greenhouses. No, that is, there's no natural gas heating them. That the sun heats them, and the way they're positioned and shaped keeps them warm enough in Ontario for 10 and a half months of the year, which if you've lived in Ontario, you know is pretty amazing. That you can grow spinach in December, when the snow's usually about that deep, with a little ice on top of it. And they've even gotten semi-year-round, sort of 8-month vegetable production as far north as the Yukon. I find that amazing, since the sun isn't out for a couple months. Anyway, that's an example of the kind of innovation that is going on, and all of it reduces fossil energy demand, because otherwise the vegetables would be coming from Mexico or California, and you'd be, a very high percentage of the fossil energy used in their production would be in getting them from there to here, whereas now they're being produced and consumed within a matter of a few kilometers. Okay, I'll just go one quick note on renewable energy, another area which is sort of market-based. Now it's the case in Canada that 300,000 people work in clean energy sector. About 100,000 more than work in the oil and gas extraction and mining combined, which is rather remarkable, since the great complaint is you're going to ruin jobs for people if we phase out oil. I think quite the opposite is the case. You're going to increase the number of jobs. Okay. I also had a lot more commentary, but I'll just throw in a sentence. Solar and wind energy distribute income far more broadly than does fossil energy, both geographically and in terms of social class. For a whole lot of reasons. I won't give you all the details so that I do keep to my time. Okay, two other things worth mentioning in this complex non-national government sector. There are institutionally based initiatives, particularly universities, hospitals, even churches have done an awful lot to reduce their carbon footprint. There's a poster out there showing one of the things they're doing here. A couple I'd mention is there are hospitals in Allentown working with the Rodale Institute, which is an organic farming based firm that's been and publisher for the last 50 years. They're growing organic produce on hospital land to supply food for patients. Food Share in Toronto is a very large nonprofit that redistributes excess food from business events and supermarkets to families in need, avoiding food waste. And they do it by the dozens, if not hundreds of tons a year. There are 80 employees of this nonprofit. Okay, I'll just throw out local government. I think most people understand what it can do and why it's important. One of the greatest authorities it has, and national governments don't necessarily have it themselves, is zoning. You can, if you want a more compact city and less sprawl, you can adjust zoning such that you can build up. If you look around you in Montreal, it's certainly happening here. If you're in that dense area, life is easier without a car. My 40-year-old son lives in downtown Toronto. He not only doesn't have a car, he doesn't have a driver's license. He takes transit, he rides a bike, he walks. It's easy, it's easier. Try parking anywhere in downtown Toronto, So zoning is an important power, and the other ones are all fairly obvious. Infrastructure, transit, procurement. One of the important political facts is that the power of oil companies in Texas and Saudi Arabia have damned little influence over a city council that's 3,000 miles from either or more from either place. But local businesses are created by carbon reduction. Solar panel installers and a whole array of others, retrofitters of various kinds. And they have influence on local city councils. So if, we're gonna, in the places where national governments reject progress, it can continue in other jurisdictions. And in fact, there are hundreds of US mayors who have signed pledges to meet the Paris Agreement anyway, within their jurisdictions. Okay, so the policy outcome of this is that what are needed are opportunity structures that can accelerate dispersed citizen, small business, municipal, institutional initiatives. Obviously, carbon pricing is one of them, on the national level, but there are a whole range of other things that can be done, anywhere from providing retraining opportunities to public funding for rental land for farmer startups, that is creating more local farmers that supply locally by using public funding for land. There's a group in Ontario that is working hard on the federal government to use the 25,000 acres put aside for a second Toronto airport to be developed as small farms serving the Toronto community, which is within 10 miles of where that airport would be. Okay, there are also obviously all kinds of measures that could be taken, opportunity structures at the local level, like property tax initiatives for installing solar panels over parking lots, also keeping the snow and ice off your car at the same time. And maybe the other one, there's a long list I have, but I won't run through them all. The point is that this is a strategy of action, not just federal grand action, but local actions. One of the very interesting ones is European, in that there are 2 or 3 cities, one in France, I can't remember which one, which offer free public transit. There are other communities that offer free public transit on Sundays. There's variations on this. Free public transit could be very, very expensive, but there are limited ways it could be done. It could be given to selective groups of people by income. It could be done in all kinds of other ways. Okay, I'd also throw in that the Green New Deal, which looks to look at inequality, reduction, and climate action simultaneously, because there are overlaps, is another way to move forward. And one of the things that's important about this, even without a Green New Deal, but with it, is that building a low-carbon economy creates non-retail, non-automatable, non-exportable jobs in food, in research, in infrastructure, in energy installation, home renovation. The New Democratic Party, which, if you're not from Canada, is a social democratic party, is calling for, in its campaign for this fall's election, retrofitting all Canadian buildings for energy efficiency by 2050. The union movement is very keen on this. It would create huge numbers of jobs, but obviously the lowest cost way to get carbon reduction is actually energy efficiency, not replacing it with renewable energy. Okay. I'll just get to the last section then by way of conclusion. Communicating climate action urgency and possibilities is the title of the section. Time. I thought we were getting there. I just would advocate, one of the things I would advocate is after you get your article on climate change policy in a respectable journal, take another take on it and aim it at a wider audience. Do an op-ed, put it online, do something else, communicate it to citizens and communicate why it's important. I think this is, in a sense, it's a duty of scholars when the world is facing a problem of this size. So that's a sort of an advocacy point. We need to design and communicate no regrets climate policy actions that will be seen as worthwhile even by citizens uncertain about climate change. That is, there are side benefits associated that have to be communicated about climate actions. There are environmental side benefits in terms of air and water quality, and there are numerous social gains. There are more skilled, stable jobs, opportunities, there are more livable cities, and there is greater rural prosperity. I mean, as a counter to populism, I think that's quite crucial. There are more jobs, the solar panels and the wind. Where are the most wind turbines being built in America now? Texas. And that they are certainly not doing it because they're worried about climate change. Okay, thank you.